Well, hello TRC, it's been a while. Check my audio real quick, we are a little early. And everything seems to be good to go. Well, welcome in TRC, the racing club. Join the Discord. It will be in the stream chat throughout the stream tonight. Here we are with another season opener. Not quite the season opener, but it is pre-season testing here at Barcelona. $15 or 16 turns, however you like to perceive the track. I say it's a 16-turn track, as we're on board with Skunkle, as we don't quite have all of the legitimate names up there yet that you will see once we get the official server started, but some practice here, and we are wet. Not 100% confirmed going to be wet for the racing sessions tonight, but we do have some storms that have moved their way into Spain. They were on the board, but albeit not expected. But we have this new series, BMW, the BM246W series. Oddly named, but aptly named. It is going to be the BMW M2, the BMW M4 GT4, and the BMW M6 GT3 as the not so much choices, but going to be the spec of car. It is going to be those three cars rotated throughout the series, so it is going to be a spec series, but everyone is going to be in the same car throughout different points of the season. So we'll have rounds of M2s, rounds of M4 GT4s, and rounds of M6 GT3s. We'll have rounds of every single car, I believe. If anyone wants to come into the chat and correct anything that I may have said wrong, you can come correct me. You are very welcome to, but I believe that I've hit it on the head. Well, let's go for a ride here in the wet with Uncle Bunny in this BMW M6 GT3. Opting for the GT3, we have some choices of the GT4 and a lot of choices of the M2. Everyone's going to have to drive every car at some point throughout the season. I think now is just the time to pick the car that you're least comfortable with and do your best to learn it. Most everyone's driven the M2. I don't think everyone's driven the M4 GT4. And I don't think very many people have driven the M6 GT3. Most might prefer the M4 GT3 that we have now. But regardless, it is the hand that you are dealt. You must play the cards in your hand. A little bit treacherous coming behind that BMW M2 out of turn 9. Hard braking into turn 10. Very tricky corner here. Very acute apex back up the hill for 11 and 12. The complex of 11, 12, 13, and 14. I guess 13 or 14 and 15 are technically the final chicane, but the complex of 10, 11, and 12 is a lot of time to be lost or made. And then here through the final chicane before the final turn. This final turn here, flat out, in some conditions, obviously not in the way. You're going to be pedaling your way through, trying to put the power down and bring that car around the outside as fast as possible. Quite a muted exhaust note from this BMW M6. But let's check in with Jack. Not out on track, the team line member, the solo GT4 so far. Well, Chandler, I would have to disagree because at Red Bull Ring Turn 2 is an uphill kink that is barely even a turn. At Laguna Seca, Turn 1 is a kink that is barely even a turn. I completely disagree with the fact that that some are considered turns and some are not. Based on the track maps that I have seen, here we have a very clear turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 is the long... Actually, let's just go for a ride. As we are heading into turn 1 with Agent 47, I believe, in a car that we can't see. It's the M8 GT3, but this may be the M4, and we may have the M6 GT3 to choose from as well. I'm not 100% sure. We've got quite a few GT3s and quite a few BMWs to choose from, but through the long right-hander of 3 into the shorter right-hander of 4 before we head down the hill for the braking zone into the left-hander of 5. A cute downhill left-hander with some off camber at the exit, and then we head up through turn 6. No braking needed, but still considered a turn, and then hard braking into turn 7. A little bit too late and off the track, but turn 8 here, the kink is technically a turn based on the track maps and notations that I have seen. And then bring the car through turn 9 as smoothly as possible before you are hammered down the back straight into turn number 10. Well, Chandler, I can say that many Vinny tracks all over the world have some deceiving turn names, because there are some tracks where turn 1 at Laguna Seca you would think is the Andretti hairpin, but it's actually turn 2. Turn 2 at Red Bull Ring you would think is the right-hand acute hairpin at the top of the hill. That's technically turn 3. Trying to think of any other instances of turns that are not necessarily turns. I mean, you could call like Dingle Dell at Brands Hatch one of the kinks. Not technically a turn. I mean, Sheen Curve is, well, I mean, it's technically a turn. Trying to think of what other tracks have kinks that are considered a turn instead of in terms of the turn number. Yeah, I mean, there are some where I know that I may be messing up. The thing that gets me a lot of times is the track or the turn names. So you can have the counts of them, but getting the names of them is something else. And from what I've seen here at Barcelona, they're not very often do you go by turn name here at Barcelona, but tracks like Imola, Monza, Spa, you could say Laguna Seca, because you've got the Andretti hairpin, corkscrew, rainy curve. What else? I mean, all of the British tracks, you've got Brands Hatch, which is, you know, Hell Corner, Surtees, Westfield, Dingledale, Hawthorne, Sheen. Oh, there's another one, Sterling's. But I mean, then you've got the Nordschleife, where you've got Mercedes Arena, the Yokohama S, the Dunlop Hairpin, the Schumacher S, Bilstein Curve, Ravenel Curve, Ravenel Curve, then Bilstein Curve, and then the Advan Kink, and then the Chicane, and then Nordcare, Sabine Schmitz Curve, Hatzenbeck, Hockeichen, Kudelbacher Hoa, Flugplatz, Schwedenkreuz, Arenberg, Fuchsrow, which is technically Foxhole, down into the compression, up the hill into Adenar Forst. And then after Adenar Forst, you have Metzigesfeld. What is after Metzigesfeld? It is the right-hander. Starts with a K. It's not Klostertal, because Klostertal is the, I want to say Klostertal is the right-hander heading back towards the carousel. I'd have to look at my map, which I conveniently have right here beside me. So it's Callenhard. Callenhard is the right-hander before you head into the miss-hit-miss section, which everybody calls miss-hit-miss. It's actually named Versiphen. And then you have Breitscheid, which is that downhill, the downhill kink that comes in the inside, a little bit short right-hander, and then the left-hand hairpin that comes in very easy. You're very fun in momentum cars. You're able to slide the car through. I love doing that in the Toyota AE86 on a Zoto Corsa. And then you have Punkt, which is the kink, and then the left-hander uphill with the houses, the very pretty section. You have X-Mula, which is the right-hander up the hill that gets you towards Bergwerk. Bergwerk is the right-hand kind of big hairpin as you get down onto what's I would consider the back straight at the Nordschleife, which takes you to the kink of Kesselchen. And then you have Mutt Curve, which is Bravery Corner, that kink that brings you to Klostertal. Hopefully that didn't sound too terrible. And Klostertal is what turns you back around and brings you to the carousel, and then after the carousel is my favorite part. You have Hohe Acht, Wipperman, Eschbach, Brunchen, Flansgarten. Brunchen is that YouTube corner section. Flansgarten is the jump. And then after the jump, you go down the hill, flat out all the way through Schwabenschwanz, up into the Kleine Carousel. Then after the Kleine Carousel, you have... Oh man, I need to get a new controller. This controller is not very good with the 3.5mm jack. But after Schwabenschwanz and the Kleine Carousel, you do have the Dodingerhohe, which takes you to Tiergarten and Hockeichen, which then puts you back on the GP Strecke, and that's a lap of the Nordschleife. Hopefully the audio and everything sounds fine. I'm going to do another little check here just to see. Hopefully we sound okay. Yep, sounds good. As long as I don't move the auxiliary jack, we should be okay. I just need to get new controllers. Yeah, it's just got a loose jack, which I have noticed is a very big issue with the Xbox Series X and S controllers. That is why we are trying to fund the PC so I can actually use real microphones and not have to worry about faulty 3.5mm jacks that causes me to then go have to buy a new controller. So there is a fund for the PC. You can find it in the About tab of the channel, but we are looking to fund a PC for the better overlays and sound quality and things of that sort. I believe that is the M6 GT3, which I was correct the first time. I don't know why I called it an M8 for a second. M6 GT3. We should have a few new drivers tonight. But we should be getting kicked over to the official server for the little bit of practice and then the qualifying here before too long. Yep, 10-minute practice, 15-minute qualifying, and then an hour of racing. 3 20-minute races. Should be interesting testing tonight as Recruit goes around, just a little bit of that grass, and with the wet conditions that we will see here, or that we are seeing here, that is nothing too out of the ordinary. And there is the server reset. Give us just a minute and we will be back with the official practice session here very shortly. The official server is up, but we will give it just a second before we get started with them. Allow the Series S players to get in so they don't have any issues. And then we should be okay. And we will refresh again. So, Project Motor Racing is one that I know of, which I believe is the farming simulator guys doing Project Motor Racing. I have not seen Endurance Motorsport Series, and Rensport, I have seen some gameplay. It does not look to be very good. We did get notification, so we have the new World of Outlaws game coming at the end of the year. Should be, I think it's like in the next month or two. NASCAR 2025 should be coming next year. Le Mans Ultimate has confirmed that they are working on a console build for the game, which would be very, very big in the sim racing scape for consoles. Hopefully crossplay. I don't see why not. Yes, the race is starting. I was just allowing the servers to be properly reset. Also allowing the drifting to stop with the cars. When you first join a session, the cars don't quite load right, so you got to give it a second. I am most excited for the new NASCAR game, granted that it is going to be developed for consoles by Monster Games, which they have done an awesome job with the World of Outlaws games porting the iRacing engine to consoles. So World of Outlaws brings the iRacing simulation and the iRacing tuning, not quite in its full scope, but does bring the iRacing kind of experience to console, which we should be seeing something very similar with NASCAR 25. It could be high hopes. Hopefully it's something better than Heat. I have never personally played a Heat game, but the arcadiness of them kind of pushed me away. Monster Game seems to be really good at giving us a mix of arcade and sim. Because I have told you, or not told, but I have definitely experienced and can tell you that the force feedback on World of Outlaws is very, very good. Yes, so the developer that the NASCAR games, as well as IndyCar and World Endurance Championship and the British Touring Car Championship, were under the developer of Motorsport Games, and they have undergone a lot of lawsuits and lost a lot of licenses. So Motorsport Games they had the NASCAR license, had the IndyCar license, had the British Touring Car Championship license, and they were producing the Heat games under the Motorsport Games developer name. Well, they lost the IndyCar license due to failure to, I guess, meet demand. They lost the NASCAR license to the same thing, and they still hold on to the British Touring Car Championship, but they are the ones who are developing Le Mans Ultimate, and that is their saving grace. That is all they have left is Le Mans Ultimate. If Le Mans Ultimate fails, then Motorsport Games goes under as a company. Motorsport Games is the one, if you may remember, that bought the R-Factor 2 engine and essentially bought R-Factor 2 and all of their development, and that's what they were going to port the NASCAR 21 Ignition game to. And everybody was very, very excited, like, oh, R-Factor 2 engine, you know, it's going to be great. We're going to have R-Factor 2 on consoles. It's going to be NASCAR. It's going to be sim-based. And then it came out, and it was a broken mess, and I think the game still doesn't work. It was terrible. Didn't have proper wheel support. The cars would go underground. The game did not work, and nobody played it, and it made everybody very, very, very mad because they were charging $60 for these games. So hopefully Le Mans Ultimate can right the ship that is the Le Mans Ultimate Motorsport, or the Motorsport Games sinking ship, because it is rough for Motorsport Games. They have not made money in a long time, and I personally don't think they really deserve to. Anyway, aside from some developer rants and some talk of upcoming video games, let's focus on the one that we're looking at right now. Zero Corsa Competizione, with the TRC preseason testing here at Barcelona. We will be running a full race weekend with these cars, but it is not going to be the spec series that we have seen, or we will see. It is going to be just the cars that everyone is least comfortable with. We have a lot of M2s out here. And I mean a lot of M2s. A couple M6 GT3s, and I think we had a couple M4 GT3s, or maybe the M4 GT3 is not a choice that can be picked. A few GT3s, a lot of M2s, and a couple GT4s. It was just one GT4, now we have a couple GT4s. 3 GT4s to be exact, Jennings, Cook, and Craters. And we will be getting another lobby reset here in about a minute. So we will have to back out and get back in. I'm not sure which BMW M4 we get because the new BMW M4 does have the swan neck wing mounts where the wing mounts to the wing mount, or the wing mounts to the wing mount from the top of the wing, not the bottom of the wing like these. Something that you'll see on the Mercedes, the Audi, Porsche, anything that is the newer variant of those cars, as they went away from standard top mount wing to swan neck or crane neck mounts for those wings. But BMW M4 is the car that, as we have Cook go around. But the BMW M4 GT4 is the car that Jimmy Broadbent and company were driving at the Nordschleife in the NLS series. As we will have a server reset any moment now, and then we will get back, I believe, with a 5-minute practice, and then go into the 15-minute qualifying. And I believe it is going to be a full grid qualifying, no splits between classes. We do have multiple classes here. We do have the overall championship and the Holy Grail Championship, which is going to be the bronze drivers, those red rated drivers. Everyone will be in the same car whenever it comes to race time for round 1 next week, but tonight they will be racing in their car of choice. So as the season goes on, we shouldn't see too much in terms of inter-class relations, as we will not have multiple classes racing on track. But there are 2 classes technically out there on track. Everyone is racing for the overall championship, but the Holy Grail drivers, those red squares on the leaderboard, those are going to be your drivers that are fighting for the Holy Grail Championship, which promotes them up to silver immediately, has them pass bronze, if they win, that is. And it is a second championship that they can contend for. As we get the server reset, and we will get back into the session in just a second. And if there are any of you that are in the TRC voice call for the race, just remind everybody that the streams are live. It has been a while since I've streamed with TRC, but the streams are live. And if they wouldn't mind to turn the stream on and support, get those viewers, which puts us a lot higher up on the browsing page, I would greatly appreciate that. We should have around 20 drivers tonight, if not more. Quite a few in the voice chat. And we will now hop into the session. Ooh, back to a 15-minute practice as we are still drifting. I'll give it just a second to get everything figured out. We should be good to go. Hopefully no more drifting. It takes a minute for the server to get the bearings whenever someone new joins. But here we have our full grid, currently 22 drivers entered so far. We may have a couple more entries as the night goes on. Once again, this is a spec series. It is a spec BMW series, but everyone is able to use whatever car they want in the preseason tonight. It is just testing overall. I think the fight in these M2s is going to be very, very strong tonight. Could be the same for the GT4s as we have. This is Atwell looking to push the envelope on. Who was that? It was not Wagner, but Wagner and Atwell seem to be partners. The number 16, it was not the number 16 of Mikey, but that was the number 87 of Rowan. As we just need to get through the end of this practice session, and then we will be started with our qualifying. So we have a whole gaggle of M2s coming through right here. Who is that that has gone off? That is the number 7 of Kelta. Kelta you may recognize from Go Fast Racing series that I am streaming on Mondays. Same with Harold, we have seen in the GFR GT3 series. There may be some more names that I am not quite correlating. Bird in the all-white M2. Douglas, newcomer last season that has come out swinging, putting that BMW M6 GT3 at the top of the timing boards. Mikey currently in P2, and we've got an M2 and P3 Bird. The fastest and only BMW M2 to set a lap. Those M2s are in the touring car, the TCX class. They are not a GT, not a GT3, GT4, or GT2. They are just in the TC class, which I actually did see one of these BMW M2s at the Circuit of the Americas racing in the TCX class against some Hyundai Elantras. I believe maybe a Toyota Supra or two. Wagner and And Atwell running the same liveries. Quite a few Lime liveries out here. You will see those, as those are going to be the Team Lime members. Lime is a color for the people who are faithful to TRC. You will see a lot of Team Lime, and there is also a Team Lime emote in the Twitch emote section that you can use. Jones pulling out of the pit box in that M6 GT3. Horner, one of the Team Lime drivers and arguably one of the fastest in that M6, who notably drives with his hazard lights on quite a bit. Just pulling past a couple BMW M2s. Heiderstad almost on two wheels coming out of turn 13 with a GT4 in tow. That's a little fast out of the pit lane. And Vasquez in the M2. Arguably the driver to beat multi-time TRC Series champion. There are quite a few drivers that can put up a fight. I personally was in a fight with Vasquez in the 935 championship that just wrapped up last week. As we've got about 6 minutes left in this practice session before we get started with qualifying. Just once again like to ask, if you are new to TRC and new to the streams, if you wouldn't mind throwing me a follow and subscribing to the YouTube channel. And if you would like to support the streams or support me personally, there is the option of subscribing on Twitch. You can use an Amazon Prime subscription. It does not cost you anything if you have an Amazon Prime subscription. The Twitch Prime subscription, you get one free every month. You do have to manually renew it. It does not auto-renew. But you also have the ability, if you would like to support me otherwise, in the About tab of the Twitch channel. Closing in on 5 minutes. Douglas still with the top time of 48.1, and by quite a large margin, 1.7 seconds to Mikey behind. Still just practice though, no need to really push yet. And a lot of drivers, more than likely, if they are going to go with a BMW in GT3, they would go with the M4 GT3. This M6 is the car spec'd. So it is going to take some learning. The M2, very, very unique car. Definitely does not have as much grip, nowhere near as much as a GT4 or a GT3, and then the GT4 doesn't have anywhere near as much grip as a GT3, but a little bit more than a TCX car. Coming out of turn 4. Not quite as fast as the GT3s. Not necessarily slow by any means, but just not quite as fast. Still a full-blown race car, which the TCR cars still are, but I think they may have not TCR, the TCX cars. The TCX cars may still have some air conditioning on there. At least it looks, I believe they have mostly a stock interior. Actually, while we are on the topic, let's just go ahead and have a look. And yeah, it's a mostly stock interior. Still has the vents and things in there. It is based on a BMW M2 Club Sport, just with added cage and reduced weight and all the little race car tidbits. So we have a few teams out here. There is the option of signing up with a team. Some drivers are solo, but there are some that are on teams, and there is a team championship. as some of the teams are getting more situated. Next week we will have a more definite layout of those teams that we will be seeing. Gailing, if I am pronouncing that correct, I believe it is Gailing, in the black and gold BMW M2, or not M2, M6 GT3. I would like to guess on the chassis code of that BMW body, but I feel like I would be wrong because for a while a lot of those BMWs all looked the same, pretty much from the E46 and onward. I know the E46, but after that I don't really know too much with the new ones. I want to say there was an E52, which would be my guess for this chassis, but don't quote me on that, and I don't really know anything past that. Mikey and Douglas in a battle here in practice. Douglas eyed the move into turn number 1, but just ultimately had to back out of it as they come out of 3. Mikey slightly defensive into 4, forcing Douglas the long way around. Eventually has enough of a gap to be comfortable enough to take the racing line. Just those defensive moves just to put the car behind off just enough to where that they would have to get off of that optimal line, lose a little bit of time, and spend more time behind you, make it a lot harder to pass. About a minute and a half before we get kicked over to qualifying, as Mikey has a big moment on the inside curb of 8, almost holds on to it, but hard contact into the wall, and is a dead stop there that is going to be returned to the pit lane as Douglas emerges victorious in that battle, albeit not necessarily by their own volition, but a pass is a pass. A minute left in this session, as we have a few of our drivers just cycling through their laps, getting their last little bit of practice in before we get started with qualifying. Jennings, top of the timing boards in GT4. Gailing, the bottom of the timing boards in GT3. I was going to say the top in bronze, but they are, I believe, one of the only bronze in a GT3. Miller next behind in a GT4, and Wagner the top time in the BMW M2s. As we see, I think that's Mikey. That is Mikey. Almost lose it in the pit lane. Unsafe release there. That's going to be a penalty and a crew chief suspension. As we have just a few seconds left before the timer hits 0. And then we will just be awaiting for everyone to finish up their final laps and get kicked over to our qualifying session. 15-minute qualifying open track. There is no split like we had seen in some of the previous series. No one-shot qualifying like we saw in the 935 series. It's going to be a standard open track qualifying, and with this many different classes of cars, again, this is not what the server is going to be looking like, and I think we got a disconnection. Is that another reset? Or is that just a disconnection on my end? Just give me just a second, we'll be back in. Hopefully that wasn't just a disconnection on my end, but it may have been. Regardless, we will get back in. And it was a server crash. Hopefully not a server reset, but it was a server crash. So just give us a moment and we'll be back into it. A little bit of technical difficulty here. No biggie. Bit of a rough start to the BMW series, though. Should not be any problem later on. Just got to iron some stuff out. This is how preseason goes. So we do have some drivers piling in. Don't remember if that was an intentional reset or not, but we will be back into the session right now. And we are back. Minor server reset. But back in. Still have practice session to get through. We will just wait a little bit longer. And another reset, and I think that is going to be maybe a 5-minute practice before qualifying. So, ironing some stuff out here, and we will be back in the session momentarily. Sorry about the issues there. Now we have the 5-minute practice session, and we should be quickly back in. And we are back in. Once again, sorry about the issues, and now we've got rain. We'll have to give the session just a second to get up to speed, get the drifting out of here. And we are now good to go. In the wet, though, as we will get a few more laps. And I forgot to mention earlier, but rain is not necessarily in the forecast, but there is a chance of it. We could see some wet testing here, which would be great, as TRC is no stranger to wet conditions. As we see Kelta throwing a little bit of opposite lock in there, coming through turn 3. Trying to keep that BMW M2 TC car straight. Power down all the way through, even in the wet. Wet tires are going to be the tires you want. We got a BMW GT4 behind. I believe that was the number 24 of Cook. Making some contact with the wall. The 777 TC car of Vasquez out there for the first time. Getting some practice here in the wet before we get started with qualifying. Just 2.5 minutes left in this qualifying, or not qualifying, this practice session. This crater's going off at turn number 5. Quite a few offs here in the wet. It is going to be a set of conditions to get used to, especially if you are not much of a, or don't have much experience in these cars. In between GT3s, GT4s, and the TCX cars, the brakes are all different, the aerodynamics are all different, the sidewall of the tires is all different. They are completely different cars to get used to with completely different driving styles. everyone here will pick the one that they're worst at and give it a shot here in the preseason tonight. About a minute left in this practice session before we get on with qualifying. I will say finally getting on with qualifying, but overall not too bad, just ironing out some issues with the preseason. Hopefully no more issues, no more resets going forward, but I think we are just trying to get as many new drivers into the session as possible. Vasquez, I say Vasquez top of the timing board, but no one has put a valid lap time together as the session hit 0. Horner be first to set a lap time of 56.6, about 8 seconds off of the times that we were seeing in the drive, but more than likely not a push lap. But wet conditions, we will await to see what kind of conditions we're looking at in qualifying. There is no way to know until we get there as we await the rest of the field to cycle their way through and get started with qualifying. Some drivers getting their flying lap in, but data here is going to be huge, as just seeing how the car runs in the wet, regardless of whether or not we get to race in the wet tonight, will be big in terms of setting up the car later on, especially if you do not have much experience setting up said car. As we await the final few, Harris and then eventually the one of Harrell, awaiting those drivers to get across the start-finish line so we can get started with qualifying. Again, this is not a multi-class series, but it is going to be a multi-class testing session, as it is going to be a spec series next week. Everyone is just choosing the car that they are the least comfortable with tonight. I believe there may have been a couple that went back out on track, or just were not quite all the way in yet. Gonzalez out there in the M2, coming through the final chicane. And number 67 of Harris, I don't think will have enough time to make it all the way back around for another lap. And number 103 of Bird in that all white BMW. And that is it. Qualifying. And it is dry. Track is green, no rubber down, and it is a 10-minute qualifying today. No 15-minute qualifying. I believe it is just going to be for the shortened, or the longer practice sessions that we had, just a 10-minute qualifying before we get on with our 20-minute races. Wagner, the first one out on track. Granted, he is in a BMW M2 TCX car, will only be able to hold on to their track position for so long, as eventually you will see the GT3s and GT4 cars catching up. But for now, should be the first to set a flying lap after the outlap. I don't think that they will have quite enough of a lead to hold 2 laps, but should be able to make it around 1 without being passed. The next car behind is the GT3 of Mikey, the M6 GT3. So the BM246W series, the 2 in that 2 is this BMW M2 TCX car. The 4 is the BMW M4 GT4. And the 6 is the BMW M6 GT3. Little self-explanatory, but leading up to this series being announced, there were just some hints thrown around and everyone was trying to guess. I don't think anyone would have guessed a transition style Cup Series, as it is a Cup Series, but everyone is going to be rotating cars. It will be M2s 1 week, M4s 1 week, and M6s 1 week, and I believe a 9 or 10 week series. And I said that Wagner may be able to hold on to that little bit of track position ahead of the faster cars behind in the field, but it's not really going to last a lap. That BMW M6 GT3 definitely catching up to that M2 TCX car. And I think Mikey's going to be able to make it around. Very, very close between them, though. There was almost contact there. And now for the first flying laps, it is going to be Mikey having to deal with some, or actually not having to deal with some traffic, but it is going to be the BMW M6 GT3 of Douglas in number 32, which I was going to say would have to deal with some traffic, but very quickly negotiated the M2 of Wagner. Wagner will have some more traffic coming behind, but Mikey in the M6 GT3 does look to be the first, as long as this lap stays valid, looks to be the first to set a flying lap here in qualifying and set the pace, at least for the GT3 field. Wagner looks to do that for the GT, or the TCX field, the M2 TCX field, and that is going to be an invalidation for Mikey, as that is way too wide. Douglas should now have the, or should hold the torch to set the time to beat for GT3s. And the number 915, not the number 915, it is going to be, I believe, maybe the 59 of Jennings in the GT4. It's actually not. There is a GT4 even further ahead, I believe. The number 913 of Craters is going to be the first GT4 to set a time. Douglas looking to set the time to beat. Did not set a valid lap time. Who will set the first valid lap? It is going to be Wagner, 2:01.9, the time to beat in M2s. As Craters comes out of the final turn, what will it be to beat in GT4? Elizondo sets the first time at 56.5. It is not beaten by Craters, as Craters' lap is invalid. Jennings a second off of that 56.5 in GT4. As we now get some times popping up on the leaderboard. Elizondo in provisional pole, but they are in the second fastest class. A lot of BMWs out here, and surprisingly, or I guess not surprisingly, very little use of turn signals. Yes, these race cars do have them, and there was a BMW move for sure from the GT3. I believe that may have been the number 28 of Jones. Not too happy with the 913 of Craters. I believe it was a 913, may have been the 59 of Jennings. Douglas now setting the time to beat in GT3 of 48.020, the time to beat in GT3. Mikey 1.1 seconds behind that time. going through turn 1 and turn 2. That BMW M6 does seem to be a little squirrely with the rear end. Not quite as planted as some of the later generation GT3 cars. Elizondo still top. Jennings P2 in GT4. Craters P3. And it looks to be a return to the pits for Craters. Bird now top of the timing boards in the M2 TCX car by just a tenth. And that margin gets even smaller. 98 thousandths of a second between Bird and Harris. Bird, Harris, and Wagner, very, very close times. Actually, very close times all the way for the top 5 in M2s. Merkel now putting a time up there, P3 in GT3. Elizondo P1 GT4, Jennings P2 GT4, Craters P3 GT4, Miller P4. A little bit of a slide out of turn 1 though, and a bit of an odd re-entry there, making contact with the number 19 BMW of Merkel. Vasquez now top of the timing boards in M2s, but just barely. Bird with some definite pace there, and just needs a little bit of an improvement to get that pole position back in M2s. Douglas still top of the timing boards with a 48.0. Mikey only 0.235 seconds behind. Horner just 20 thousandths of a second behind with a 0.255 delta to the leading Douglas. Merkel with a little bit of time needing to be made, 5 seconds off of the pole position GT3. Bit of a bump here between Wagner and Elizondo. Some GT4 bumpage onto the back of that M2, and is it going to be enough to help improve the times? Wagner does not need anything. Wagner pole by just a tenth, 1.2 seconds in TCX. Vasquez P2, Bird P3, Harris P4, Kelta P5, Heiderstadt P6, Harrell P7, Norman P8, Grant, Trotman Grant P9, Gonzalez P10, Rowan P11, Atwell P12, and Drain P13. Quite a few BMW TCX cars. And with 50 seconds left for this qualifying session, granted this is just preseason, no points, no positions on the line, but just a show of dominance and bragging rights early on. Mikey P2 GT3 in the pit lane. Douglas will have enough time to make it around for one more, but it's a poor exit out of the final corner, having to deal with some traffic. Will it be an improvement? Douglas not going to go for another lap, pulling over and ending their qualifying session. Horner needs 2.5 tenths, or a little bit more than 2.5 tenths, has to negotiate some quit traffic, which I think may have allowed him to go by, or just had enough of a speed advantage to go by. Douglas and Mikey have solidified their positions. It's going to be up to Horner to see if he can improve on their times and take a quarter of a second out of his time and put that BMW M6 on pole. Jennings top of the timing boards in GT4 by only a tenth. Times are very, very close. It is Jennings with Elizondo behind the M2 of Wagner, and I think Wagner has been bumped to pole position. Jennings holds on to pole in GT4 for now. Craters does have a little bit of time left to go. A couple corners, does have the margin that needs to be made. Needs to pull 2 seconds in order to get on pole, and this is not going to happen here as Craters goes around. Horner coming out of 9, running down towards 10. A lot of open air up ahead. No reason to be slowed by traffic. Jones does have some traffic to deal with, though. Miller coming out of the final corner. Is it going to be an improvement? Miller currently P4 in GT4, stays P4 in GT4. Bird, no improvement in TCX. Do have the number 185 TCX of Gonzalez coming out to finish their qualifying session. What is it going to be for Gonzalez? It's going to be an improvement by 2 positions. The 246 not improving. The 915 of Horner not improving. Staying at P3. The number 28 BMW GT3 of Jones looking to improve. Does not improve. Stays P4. The number 35 TCX of Granados looking to improve. Will it be an improvement here? Will not be an improvement. Stays where they are. And the number 42 of Romero goes up into the top 10 in TCX. Well, for preseason, how are they starting? In GT3, Douglas P1, Mikey P2, Horner P3, Jones P4, Merkel P5, and Gailing P6. In GT4, Jennings P1, Elizondo P2, Miller P3, Craters P4, and Cook P5. And in the regular traffic class, which is definitely going to be traffic in this race tonight, Wagner P1, Bird P2, Vasquez P3, Kelta P4, Harrell P5, Harris P6, Heiderstadt P7, Atwell P8, Romero P9, Gonzalez P10, Norman P11, Trotman Grant P12, Rowan P13, Drain P14, and Granados P15. There's good racing to be had all the way down the field, but the race to watch, well, it's all of them. In GT3, we have seen very, very close times. The top 3 separated by just 1/4 of a second. In GT4, the top times separated by just a couple tenths. It was 2 tenths between Elizondo and Jennings, and in M2s, Wagner, albeit by the grace of the bump, P1 by 6 tenths, but the top 5 within a second. I think those times may have been a little bit manipulated with some antics, but it's just preseason, no harm, no foul. Well, 1:40 before we get engines fired and rolling here for the formation lap. Looks to be a clean race here, no rain. It is a little bit cloudy, so the track will be cooler than we expected. Will be cooler than it is in the sun. But quite a robust field out here. Do we have anyone starting at the back? Gailing, starting at the back in a GT3, has a long way to go and a lot of BMW M2s to negotiate. A minute left, 30 seconds before we get engines fired, and a minute before we get rolling for the formation lap. Once again, I would just like to ask, if you are not following the Twitch, if you wouldn't mind throwing me a follow. If you are not subscribed on YouTube, which the Twitch and YouTube following is quite a big disparity there. But if you are not following on YouTube, if you wouldn't mind throwing a subscription there, and if you would like to support the streams, you can consider subscribing or consider using a Twitch Prime subscription. You get a free one with your Amazon Prime. Well, on board with Douglas as this M6 is now fired up. We just await timer to hit 0 and get rolling here. And we should... looked like it was, or sounded like it was a stall there for a second, but Douglas eventually did get that M6 fired up. And let's look at the field going back as they get off of the line and get rolling. Here at the back of the field, Granados in the BMW M2 TCX rolling off the line. And there is quite a long way to go. The leader's coming through turn 2. Back of the pack just barely making it into turn 1. Well, here we go. Feels good to be back with TRC. It has been a while since I have done a race with TRC. And TRC does have quite a good following of fans. As we come through turn 4, Douglas getting us a little bit of weaving here, warming up those tires, or doing the best to do so, as the field just does their best to get those tires warmed up, warm those brakes up. With a 90-degree turn 1, having a car that is at its optimum operating state, you would say in its prime, is as good of an outcome as you can expect on a formation lap, as you want to have those tires nice and warm for the traction, those brakes nice and warm for the malleability so they can slow you down. That is a whole lot easier to stop a ball of putty than it is a glass marble. Just trying to generate some temperature in those brakes. When we get into turn 1, you don't just absolutely lock them up and plow into the cars ahead. We do not like to bowl here in TRC, at least not into turn 1. As everyone just tries to get those tires warmed up, Jennings leading the GT4 field. There will be a gap that will quickly build between Jennings in GT4 and Merkel in GT3. And then in TCX's, Wagner leading that field, but they will be getting dropped very, very quickly. Luckily for Wagner, they are on a row by themselves of only TCX cars, only BMW M2s. And as we get lined up 2 by 2, we're about to take the green flag here in preseason here at Barcelona in the BM246W spec series. Multi-class testing, but it is a spec series. And Douglas on pole in GT3 looks to take the green flag here momentarily. As green, 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 the green flag waves, we are racing, and the field tries to consolidate as we head towards turn number 1. Looks to be hard on the brakes. Douglas going offensive, taking the optimal racing line, and the field behind follows through. But it is Mikey looking for the late lunge into turn number 1. Does not get it. They will be side by side. Very, very easy to make some left front fender to right rear quarter panel contact and cause a car to go around. Harrell gets a drive-through penalty for, I believe, a starting infringement. Or I think it may have actually been a speeding in the pit lane, trying to get out of the pit lane, starting from the pit lane. Douglas leading the GT3 field. Elizondo trying to creep up into the front of the GT4 field, does get that move solidified ahead of the pole-sitting Jennings. And in M2's Wagner is holding on to that lead for now. Bird just behind, and we have a couple battles starting to spark up. The teammates of Kelta and Harris putting Vasquez in a sandwich. Vasquez, very, very quick driver. Do not rule them out no matter where they are on the grid. Very, very quick Vasquez. Douglas pulling a gap to the battling Horner and Mikey. Just a 20-minute race here in race number 1, as all races today will be 20 minutes. But as these GT3 start to battle, Douglas, as you can see, just starts to pull away. Horner and Mikey very, very close in qualifying, and almost some contact. Mikey late on the brakes, almost going into the rear of Horner, and Horner very wide at the exit of 15, coming into 16. Mikey may have some slipstream here as we go to look backwards and see if Mikey is actually going to be getting close enough as they come here into turn number 1. Mikey may go for the lunge. He is one no stranger to doing so. Holds the inside, looks to force Horner defensive, but as they come through turns 2 and eventually into 3, Horner is just holding on to it. We do get the rare BMW turn signal indicator, as I believe Horner would like to have it known that they are not a typical BMW driver. Elizondo with the early move, passing Jennings for the GT4 lead. Now just looks to open that gap, and they do seem to be doing so. In M2's Wagner holding on to that lead. Bird now dropping back slightly and looks to be under attack from the M2 of Kelta. Vasquez also fast on Kelta's heels as Vasquez looks to open a gap to the chasing Harris behind and looks to break off this top 4 in M2s. Horner still ahead of Mikey. And the longer that battle rages on, the further along Douglas will pull away ahead. Elizondo coming out swinging in GT4s and has definitely grown that gap. Craters now on to the back of Miller and is looking to go past Miller. May be able to set this move up early into the turn 1. As Craters gets a good run out of turn 15, will definitely have the slipstream. And I was looking at Jennings actually getting a poor exit out of the chicane. That will compromise their exit. And Craters looking for a move into turn number 1. It will be a hard braking move, positioning offensive on the inside, forcing Miller to try and go late. Now Craters has the better racing line and will carry more speed through 2 and eventually 3. As Craters not quite having this move done by the time they get out of 3, but as they head into 4, it may be a different story. Kelta closing up to the rear of Bird. Heiderstadt into the pit lane. I wonder if that was an issue or could have been a spin. Heiderstadt into the pit lane. We may have actually lost a couple drivers. Harris was up at the front. Is there damage on that M2? I don't really see any. Kelta now under attack from Vasquez as this battle in the M2 TCX field is heating up. As Vasquez trying to feint the move, force Kelta to go defensive and open the door to allow Vasquez to go by and put the attack onto Bird as Miller in the GT4 around between turns 8 and 9. Vasquez now looks to pull alongside, does the crossover into turn 10. It would be very, very late, and they almost make contact. Kelta forced to take evasive action, and Vasquez does get that move done. Vasquez up into P3 in M2s. A lot of respect between those two to not make any contact. But Vasquez ultimately winning out there. Kelta does have a shout of getting this position back, and it may be a late lunge. As Vasquez now has to abandon the chicane, that will be a very, very poor exit. Now Kelta has the opportunity to fight back here as they come down the pit straight. Vasquez has a very poor exit. Kelta will have the slipstream, and is Kelta going to be able to go past? Vasquez forcing Kelta to go offensive. Vasquez defensive into turn number 1, taking the inside line, will force Kelta to try it the long way around the outside as they come into turn number 1. Kelta all the way wide to get the best run through turn 1 and eventually turn 2, but they are side by side, door-to-door racing out of 2 and into 3. As car number 1, that is Harrell, gets a drive-through for speeding in pit lane. I think it may have actually been a drive-through trying to serve that penalty awarded earlier. Car number 117 of Gailing, hard contact into the wall around at the exit of turn number 1, entrance of turn 2, and that is very, very, very big impact, showing us what is under the hood of that BMW M6 GT3. But that is going to be into the pit lane meatball flag for Gailing. Mikey As Horner is at the back of the field, Jones finds themselves in P2 in GT3 with quite the long way to go. So I think there may have been some contact between Horner and Mikey battling for the GT3 podium. Elizondo pulling a large gap to the GT4s behind. Craters up into P3, now on the hunt, looking to go past Jennings in GT4. And Wagner still in the lead. Kelta back into P3 as I think Vasquez may have had an incident. Surprised that I didn't see it, wasn't notified of the yellow flags. But Vasquez dropping back now quite a few positions, unsure of exactly what caused that, if it maybe was just overdriving the car. But now Vasquez, as we have a few cars coming into the pit lane, that is the number 42 of Romero coming in, unsure exactly what is going on there. Maybe not enough fuel in the car, but that is what preseason testing is for. Now, Mikey and Jones. The battle for the lead is all but gone as Douglas has driven away with that lead. Jones now will be under attack from Mikey. Craters will be attacking Jennings. This is battle for P2 in both GT3 and GT4. As Vasquez, looking like Vasquez made it past Drain, now working on Atwell. A lot of time to be made up. Mikey onto the rear of Jones in the M6 GT3. Jones going wide. Mikey does go through. And maybe Jones with the answer to Mikey's overtake. Is it going to be a late lunge from Jones? It would have to be into turn number 1. It is not. But the battle is not over yet. Jones definitely still has pace in this car. No reason for any tire fall off as we do not have any stops. We will have to keep an eye on that battle. Jennings having to avoid or jump out of the chicane. End up abandoning the chicane, that's the word I was looking for, as that will allow Craters to go by. Jones and Mikey still in battle here as we are now halfway through the race. Less than 10 minutes left. Does give us about 4 or 5 laps left. But Jones looking to gain some position back on Mikey. We'll have the slipstream down this back straight headed towards turn 10. Mikey not necessarily under fire yet, but is taking the center line. Not quite all the way to the outside like Jones is. And Jones just trying to claw this position back ever so slowly. That is not exactly what he is going to be looking for coming out of turn number 13, though. Just needing to optimize those corner exits to gain back whatever track position you can on Mikey, but that gap is growing at the next timing board. Now over a second. Jones outside of slipstream range as Horner has had a big off at the final corner. Don't know if that was contact between Horner and Merkel, but that is going to be Horner's race over there. Big hard contact into turn number 16, the final turn. And I think Horner will be meatball flagged and bringing that car in shortly. I think we may have seen a few cars with some fueling mishaps. Wagner still comfortably in the lead. I say comfortably. Bird is 1.7 seconds behind. Not quite a gap to worry about most of the time, but that is still a position to worry about. Atwell and Drain. Vasquez back up into P3 and M2s, as Vasquez has made it past both Atwell and Drain. Drain now closing up onto the rear of Atwell, though, and this may be a battle for position P4 and M2s. Teammates Kelta and Harris going side by side as Kelta almost goes up on two wheels. We have seen two wheels in M2s. Actually, it was not in M2s. It was in the Maserati GT4s, where I believe it was Winter went on two wheels coming out of that chicane. But we've got a three-way battle for position here in M2. Kelta, Harris, and Norman. Three TRC veterans battling it out into turn number one in M2s. It is teammate boxing in the opposing car behind, and they will exit turn one as they entered. Harris, Kelta, and Norman. Jones with Merkel behind now. I think Jones may have had an incident at the final corner, as Merkel has gained a large, or has closed up a large gap, gained a lot of time onto the rear of Jones. Heiderstadt did go into the pit lane, but that is the BMW M2 that we see ahead of the leading Wagner and Bird. Now Jones looks to be under attack from Merkel momentarily. See how this battle develops. Kelta with Gonzalez up ahead. Kelta and Harris, teammates, still looking like they are battling it out. Kelta and Harris both quick drivers. Kelta, you will see races in the GFR GT3 series as Harris has a big incident and off at turn 13. That will drop him behind Drain. Or not Drain, that will drop him behind Norman. And almost on two wheels again, Kelta, as Norman is now going to have a good run out of the final corner, car number 117. That is Gailing now into the pit lane. Merkel still with a gap to close onto Jones behind, but Jones does have some M2 traffic to deal with. I think trying to pick up a little bit of slipstream there from those M2s. And now hard onto the brakes into turn number one. Merkel with that traffic getting in an inopportune position for him, as Merkel will now drop back. That gap will open up. Elizondo with a lead in GT4 by quite a large margin to Jennings behind. Wagner still in P1 in M2s, with Bird just behind. And the GT4 of Miller looking to go through as well. Bird had a little bit of a double take heading into turn 10. I think that may have been a look at abandoning the corner, but eventually did commit to the braking point and stay on to their lap. Douglas, your race leader, has cycled through some of the M2 traffic, will come by the M2 leaders as we will have the full M2 crossover. I don't think that we would have a GT4 crossover in this race. But M2s, we're seeing that it takes about 18 minutes or so. I would say around 17 or 18 minutes for the full crossover between classes. Again, not a multi-class series, but just a multi-class race today, as that gap between Wagner and Miller Wagner and Bird has grown quite a lot, as Miller did end up going past the M2 of Bird. As we've got a battle in GT3, as they've got to negotiate some traffic, but Merkel and Jones hard braking into turn number one. Merkel does get the late braking into turn one and does take that position back. As they come out of turn three, is Jones going to be able to fight this one back? The gap is still pretty close, and as long as Jones stays within slipstream range, it is not out of question. As Jones is definitely closing that gap up, we also have a battle ahead between the number 66 and number 3 BMW M2s, Atwell and Drain. As we've got this battle on screen, and then in the background, the battle between the GT3s. As Merkel goes off, does that open the door for Jones? I think Jones may have just had to back out as to not make contact, and Jones does not seem to be too happy about that. Side by side between Atwell and Drain, looks to be a crossover. As Drain now takes that position, or at least takes the inside, does not fully have this position. There's a roadblock of M2s ahead of the battling GT3 M6s behind. Merkel is like, get out of my way. The guy that I'm racing is right behind me. As they go to the outside to allow the traffic to come through, it's going to be 2 by 2 almost between the classes. A GT3 besides a TCX car, and then a TCX beside a GT3 car. Merkel gets a little bit of a touch, and now the TCX cars are back ahead. We need to fully go past this traffic in TCX now. As Jones now pulls back ahead, will take the 3rd place position back, and now tries to place the M2 TCX cars between himself and Merkel. But Merkel is able to get past that M2 traffic, and Atwell and Drain still door-to-door racing, as Douglas looks to be on our final lap of the race. So this is going to come down to the line. Douglas leading in GT3, leading overall. Elizondo leading in GT4 by quite a large margin. Bird now, or actually Bird not leading. Bird was, looked like Bird was leading in M2s. Wagner leading M2. Bird with Vasquez just behind, but the battle that I was watching is the battle between the M2s of Atwell and Drain, and then the battle of the GT3s of Merkel goes wide at turn 8. I believe that will hand the 3rd place to Jones. Douglas, your race leader, as the clock comes down to 0. It will just barely hit 0 as Douglas comes across the line to take the checkered flag in race number 1. Mikey will take P2 in GT3. Jones, just a couple corners left, looks to take P3 in GT3. The battle between Vasquez and Bird. Vasquez got dropped off of the back of that battle. The battle between Drain and Atwell seems to have been decided almost, as Drain went deep into the chicane. Does that allow Atwell a run into the start-finish line? I don't think Atwell is quite close enough. That is how they will finish. Horner with damage did not have to park that car, but probably can't see as well as he could have earlier. We'll bring home P4 in GT3. Does dive past the M2 of, I believe that is Trotman Grant. I guess Horner can see. Well, actually, maybe not. He did go wide. It's that M6 GT3 has seen better days. Wagner takes the win in M2. Elizondo will be bringing home the checkered flag in GT4 here very shortly. That is a conclusion of this race. The 913 of Craters was eventually, or overall, not able to get past the GT4 of Jennings. And the final car to cross the line will be Craters. In race number 1 in GT3, Douglas taking that win. Mikey P2, Jones P3, Merkel P4. That was a hard-fought battle between P3 and P4. P5 Horner, P6 Gailing. In GT4, Elizondo P1, Jennings P2, Craters P3, Cook P4, Miller P5, and in TCX, the M2s, Wagner P1, Bird P2, Vasquez P3, Drain P4, Atwell P5, Kelta P6, Harris P7, Norman P8, Gonzalez P9, Rowan P10, Trotman Grant P11, Romero P12, Harrell P13, Granados P14, and Heiderstadt P15, I believe, with a disconnection midway through the race. That is race 1. We're about to get started here with race 2 any moment now. Same qualifying order, same starting order as what we just saw in race number 1. Here with race number 2, as we once again give the drivers a break. They are able to tweak any changes to their car setup as needed and able to eventually get rolling here once again for this pre-season testing at Barcelona. Well, I believe that, that would be great if they could. They would have to set the qualifying order before, which would take a lot of time. Also, if you are driving or racing, feel free to share the streams with any friends or family that you have, as I'm sure they would like to support you while you are racing. About 30 seconds before we get rolling here again. "15 seconds till we are engines fired and rolling yet again." It is good to be back with TRC. This is not the only series that TRC runs. They do have Monday and Friday GT3 series, as well as the TRC 6 hour coming up this weekend, a 6 hours of the Nordschleife that I will be commentating. So if you are going to be racing in that, or if you would like to watch that event, you can find it here. Make sure you are following and you will get the notification for when I go live, or if you would like notifications for every time that I go live and would like a little bit more reinforcement on that notification, you can join my personal Discord server. It is linked in the Twitch stream chat, but if you would like to join my personal Discord server, you may. It is a hub for endurance racing. You will find a lot of different endurance races there. And I think they are letting the M2s go by first, as I wonder if that is going to cause some start issues. The M2s are going first as Miller, big hard contact early on. I think he may have just turned the traction control off. Unsure of exactly what's going on, but Miller has had an incident back there at the back of the field. And I believe it is going to be GT3s and GT4s starting from the pit lane, as it is M2s at the front, and the GT3s and GT4s will have to slice their way through all of the top of the timing board. Has stayed in the pit lane, and it will be M2s out in front to start this race. I think everyone just decided that that was a good idea. There's going to be a 30-second delay between the GT3s and GT4s rolling out and the start of the race for the M2s. But it will be The M2s out on their own to start this race. And as they come out of turn 9, I believe it may be 2x2 here shortly. Well, Mikey, while the GT3 and GT4 drivers are sitting in the pit lane, you may just be able to remind everybody to tune into the streams if they are driving, or share them with their friends and family, as we have been pretty high up on the Twitch metrics. Top 5% of all ACC streamers, and top 3% if you whittle it down to just English streamers. And that is going in terms of average viewer metrics. And now they get lined up 2x2, as we will follow these BMWs. Vasquez lining up side by side. And green, green, green. The green flag is waved. And it's all sorts of a messed up starting field. But it is Wagner, Kelta, and Vasquez. Wagner going defensive into turn number 1. And if it looks like chaos with the M2s here, Vasquez does lunge up into turn 2 and looks to take P2. It looks like chaos now. Just look behind, as it is a full class inversion. The GT4s were queued up at the end, and they have now left the pit boxes, and the GT3s will follow suit. It is a pretty much full reverse grid, as it is Wagner up in front. Vasquez is putting on the fight early as Wagner goes wide, and that will open up the door as Wagner is going to fall like a rock to the back of the field, or not to the back of the field, but just further back in the pack, and it is contact between Harris and Wagner. Harris was able to catch that M2, keep it out of the wall, but that is going to be now dropping like a rock for real for Harris. Wagner with some work to do, now just ahead of Heiderstadt, as Vasquez looks to pull away in the M2s, but you can hear the Jaws theme playing as the GT4s are slowly creeping up. They are just entering turn, or just exiting turn 9, as the M2s are exiting turn 10. And as they come out of turn 10, the M2s nowhere near as much cornering speed as the GT3s and the GT4s. At the front of the GT3 field, it is Jones in the M6 GT3. Does have Horner and Mikey behind. Douglas, the fastest of the GT3s, also behind, getting a lot of that sausage curb. But Vasquez and Kelta seem to have broken away from the rest of the field, as it is a battle for P3, though, between Bird, Wagner, and Heiderstadt. Wagner went for the late move into turn number 1. Now they are side by side into 2. Wagner will have the advantage with that inside line and will be trying to follow Bird through. They may be able to catch Vasquez, but with no one behind and a lot of clean air ahead, it is going to be very hard to catch Vasquez. But Vasquez and Kelta has not been shaken off of Vasquez's shoulders, as Vasquez is still holding on to that lead, but Kelta just trying to hold on to that slipstream. A gaggle of a battle here, as that was not Gonzalez, that was Romero going off at turn number 5. But a battle for position here between Wagner, Heiderstadt, and Atwell. Let's go on board with Heiderstadt and watch this from the rear, as Heiderstadt looking to close up on those two M2s ahead. This is the battle for the final spot on the podium. Battle for the lead is still raging on up ahead. As Bird goes wide, that does allow Wagner into an opportunistic position, but they make contact. Wagner off. Exit stage left. I guess that's the exit stage right. I was never a theater kid. But Wagner, big contact from pole position. Now dropping like a rock once again for real this time. As now we have GT3s looking to make their way through. Merkel, a little too eager to get past the M2 of Drain, I believe. So I'm not sure exactly which GT or which M2 that is. And now slicing and dicing. The GT3s trying to make their way through the GT or the M2 field. It is now Heiderstadt, Bird, and Drain, as Horner is leading the GT3s, trying to cut through. Let's go on board with Horner here and just see what kind of traffic that he's got to deal with. You can definitely see the pace difference here, as it's going to be a dive to the inside, but Heiderstadt is there. Heiderstadt does go wide. Is that going to force Heiderstadt to lose the position? It will open it up to Drain. As Drain looks to go up the inside, and big move, or big moment for Mikey, I think, does somehow hold on to it, keeps it straight, and rejoins the track. There is almost no way that that would have been saved, but car number 913 of Craters in the GT4 now around at turn number 5. I think that may have just been some collateral damage from seeing that spin of Mikey. And Jones also with a moment in that GT3 out of turn number 5. Now we've got an M2 of Harris, the M2 that went off earlier after that contact with Wagner. And Merkel is in a tight position here with a lot of cars to try and get through. So we will go on board with Merkel here, and there is just really nowhere to go. M2s and GT3s ahead. I think they have cut through the majority of the GT4 field. But a lot more acceleration and a lot better brakes means that your acceleration is a lot quicker and your braking is a lot quicker, but you have to anticipate the acceleration and braking of those M2s ahead. A lift from Merkel, but now clean air ahead. And how fast will Merkel catch the battling M2s? As we will go to Bird and look backwards and see how close that GT3 comes, and on the brakes it is a gap closed up by quite a bit. Still trying to battle for position with Heiderstadt and Drain ahead, as it has not taken long for the GT3s to cycle through. Now Heiderstadt going a little bit wide, and is Merkel going to thread the needle? Merkel does. Merkel threading the needle to make it through the majority of this M2 field. Horner still your leader, Mikey P2, Vasquez still holding on to the lead in M2s as Douglas goes through. Douglas, the race winner from race number 1. Kelta now P2. Then the battle for P3 between Drain, Bird, and Heiderstadt. Drain has opened up that gap a little bit as it is now between Bird and Heiderstadt for P4. But we do have the GT4s coming through. Jennings and Elizondo, the battle for the GT4 lead, as this is some big negotiation of traffic. Jennings making some contact with the M2 of Heiderstadt. Now Elizondo trying to go through. Elizondo cutting and weaving. Jones in the GT3 also behind this whole group. Jennings going very, very narrow, and a bump from Heiderstadt onto the rear of the GT4 of Elizondo. As Bird now forced inside will open the door for Heiderstadt once again. Jones in the GT3 also trying to cut their way through. And now with a big roadblock ahead, Heiderstadt goes past Bird. That is the pass for P2. As it looks like there's quite a few cars between, but we've got a lot of cars in a small space. Atwell around at turn 15. Kelta with Jennings in the GT4 going by. Elizondo looking to pull through as well. Jones now going by and is chasing these GT4s as they are trying to get to that clean air up ahead. Douglas closing up onto the rear of Mikey. This is going to be a battle brewing shortly. Elizondo had to bow out of turn number 1, but does rejoin the track and straight on for Jennings. I think that may have been a wheel disconnection. That is a technical error there, but Heiderstadt and Bird, big contact there. Big damage, and that is absolute chaos as we've had a 3-car incident, as I'm not sure what happened there, but from the lead of the race, Jennings with big time issues straight on at turn number 3 in a 3-car incident that collects the battling P3 and P4 M2s. Now that battle for P3 between Kelta and Rowan. Bird with big contact on the front of that M4. Same thing with Heiderstadt. I think Heiderstadt, which had the majority of that impact, hit Merkel square on the door. Had enough damage to need to bring that car in. The battle for P2 and GT3 warming up between Mikey and Douglas. Douglas is within slipstream range. I think we may go on board for this battle between Douglas and Mikey as we now pick up the speed. We've been on board with GT4s, we've been on board with the M2s, now on board with GT3s. And the track goes by at a lot quicker pace as Douglas pole in qualifying. The winner of race 1 looks to close the gap to Mikey up ahead, and Douglas maybe with just a little bit more experience in this M6 GT3, as this move is definitely on. It's just a matter of time. Vasquez with a sizable lead in M2s, but just behind Drain and Kelta, as Kelta got dropped off. Drain now moves up into P2 in M2s, and Craters trying to chase down the GT4 of Elizondo after that massive incident with Jennings. Well, it's all a pretty much quiet race except for some massive moments of drama here and there, as Kelta and Drain fighting in M2s as they come through turns 8 and eventually into 9. Kelta will have the slipstream, and is Kelta going to be able to get this move done? As we go on board, is it going to be a late lunge into turn 10? Eyeing the move does force Drain to go slightly defensive. Kelta trying to get a good run, but overcooks it slightly. And Vasquez, the M2 ahead, not quite out of view. Elizondo does make it past, so GT4 leader passing M2 leader. As Vasquez goes up on 2 wheels, we've seen that before, but Vasquez had the big moment there. Vasquez up on 2, and I think you do get extra points for that. Vasquez nearly rolling the car, as these M2s are not they're not necessarily a stranger to rolling. I have definitely rolled one before, I believe a couple times. Kelta and Drain. Kelta going very, very wide, very, very late. Overcooks the corner, but forces Drain to just try and drive into the rear of him. Drain obviously had to back out of that as to not spin Kelta. It's a very, very, very aggressive move from Kelta, but for P2, it is what had to be done. Now Craters in the GT4 throwing a wrench into this battle, as Drain will now have to try and claw that Delta back, get back in a position for that move. Mikey and Douglas, the battle for P2 and GT3 still rages on, as Douglas is very, very close. We will go on board with Mikey, looking backwards at Douglas. Is Douglas going to be getting closer into turn number 1 down the pit straight? Douglas will be in the slipstream, but it seems that Mikey got a much better exit out of that final turn. As they come into turn number 1, is Douglas going to go for the late braking overtake? Will just follow behind and try and get this overtake done at a separate point. Potentially turn 4 or turn 10. Big overtaking opportunities, turn 1, turn 4, and turn 10. As it is very easy to get a nose up the inside and force the car that you are trying to overtake to just run off of the racing line a little bit. But no dice just yet, as Douglas will just have to wait a little bit longer. As Craters, with a big lunge into turn 14 and 15, the chicane, does force Kelta to choke up, and now Drain is 100% back in this fight for P2 in M2s. Drain will now have the slipstream and into turn 1. Close enough for a move? I don't think so, but we'll see how brave he is. Kelta was very brave on the previous lap. Maybe Drain has something up their sleeve as well. As they come into turn 1 and eventually turn 2, Drain just trying to push too much speed out of that M2. You can see him working the front wheels, trying to fish for whatever grip he can find, but I don't think that is going to be the run that he was exactly looking for, as that gap to Kelta in front has grown slightly. Douglas still trying for the move on Mikey as they come into turn 1. Will it be on here? Douglas just not able to get past, and Mikey defending like a lion, but Mikey had to abandon, and Mikey now goes wide and slides, and Douglas will be handed that move. And now with 4 minutes left, does Douglas have enough time? In the foreground, we see the GT3 M6 of Horner. Does Douglas have enough time to close that gap and move for the lead and take this lead back? Elizondo, the GT4 leader, still on their own. Car number 103, Bird, we saw just coming through, as Bird just absolutely does not care. Gives you the absolutely fastest drive-through in the pit lane that you've ever seen, sliding the car into the pit box. I think Bird is done today, saying it's just testing, no harm, no foul. Now I think Douglas has allowed Mikey back into the fight, just some sportsmanship there, the sake of the battle, as now Douglas allows Mikey the fair chance to attack this move, try and take it back, or maybe Douglas had a big mishap. But I think it's just a sportsman move there. Cook into the pit lane with damage on that M4, yes, the M4 GT4. A lot of numbers with a lot of different classes to consider, as we've got a battle in M2s as the battle for in GT3s goes past. That is the 246 of Grant and the 185 of Gonzalez battling into turn number 1 side by side, door to door. Gonzalez does have some damage on that M2, the same for Grant. But Gonzalez and Grant side by side still as they come through 3. And Douglas is fully ahead of the number 16 M6 GT3 of Mikey. But this battling duo here as they come into turn 4, is Grant too deep? Grant is too deep. Gonzalez will take that position back. And Gonzalez looks to have this one in the bag. Rowan looking to close in on the M2 of Romero. As Craters now goes past Vasquez. Vasquez did not managed to flip the car in this race. Came very close to doing it a couple laps ago, getting onto the sausage curb at the exit of the chicane, and I believe this will not be the final lap, but once Horner comes across the start-finish line here, this will be the start of the final lap of the race. We've still got one more race tonight, one more 20-minute race. Romero and Atwell, as Atwell is looking to go past Romero for position here. And Douglas has definitely closed that move off. Mikey, I think, is going to have to live with P3 and GT3 as Horner goes past some traffic. And I think Horner will have the win here in race number 2. Harris chasing the M4 GT4 of Miller. Wagner being passed by a few of the GT3 cars, the GT3 of Douglas and Mikey. And Wagner with Atwell behind. Actually, that is not Atwell, is Wagner. Wagner, I think, is off of the lap, as that was a bit of an odd incident there, sorry. For some reason it kicked me over to drive, and I do use the M2 to get into the sessions and allow for the better cameras. But it looks like Horner is going to take home the checkered flag here in race number 2. And Horner will win race number 2. Douglas does have the fastest lap, and Douglas will take home P2, just not able to catch the GT3 of Horner. Mikey P3. Merkel eventually will come home P4. Jones P5 in GT3. Elizondo looks to take home the win in GT4. Crater's a few corners behind. And Vasquez, well, Kelta is not too far behind. Vasquez looks to take home the win here in the M2 field. Eventually, Jones will take home P5. Elizondo would take P6. Jones, big moment coming out of the final chicane. Not sure exactly what's going on with that GT3. P5 for Jones. Elizondo will take home the GT4 win. And the 913 of Craters will take home P2 in GT4. We have had a few penalties around there, drive-throughs and 30-second stop and goes, as Vasquez looks to take home the win in M2s. Was not on pole, but some very early moves just to get out front as early as possible will award Vasquez the win in M2s, and Kelta will take P2 in M2. As they finish in race 2, it is Horner in P1 ahead of Douglas, Mikey, Merkel, and Jones. And GT4, Elizondo, Craters, Miller, and Cook, as I believe Jennings has had a technical issue and has left the racetrack today. And in TCX, the M2s, Vasquez P1, Kelta P2, Drain, Harris, Wagner, Rowan, Romero, Atwell, Gonzalez, Grant, Granados, Heiderstadt, Bird, Norman, and Harrell. As we get ready for race 3, the final race tonight. Wonder if we will see the reverse grid M2s in front, then GT4s, then GT3s. It definitely made for some interesting racing tonight. Some chaos early on. As we just await the session to be kicked over, and we will be on the grid for the final time tonight for race 3. As we got a little bit of fog, not necessarily rain, like we had the chances of. I think we have had one of our GT3s bow out. That is going to be the GT3 of Jones. I think we have had Jones bow out of the session. We have lost a couple drivers in this preseason race, but it is just testing. We will be ready to get started with the round 1, the official first round of this series next Wednesday at this time. About a minute before we get started with the formation lap, and we do have some clouds here. It is a little bit foggy. The track may be a little bit cooler. It is about 40 seconds. We will be engines fired and rolling yet again. And we will no longer have Vasquez, as we have had a few drivers bow out of this session. It is running a little bit late due to the server resets, but it is preseason. This is what you get these things out for. It is once again going to be M2s on the grid by themselves, as the GT3s and the GT4s will take to the grid from the pit lane to start their race. Those things sound like absolute fighter jets whenever they're just sitting here idle. Quite a unique sound. As now the M2s are rolling, and Wagner will once again assume the lead with Bird just behind now Kelta and Harris in the second row. No Vasquez to worry about, but the teammates of Kelta and Harris will be right beside each other, as Heiderstadt will be just behind them to put some fight for the lead. Should be a very spicy start once again. Track does look a little slick, but it is optimum. It's not going to be a green track like we had seen previously. And as Wagner takes us into turn 5, we will get ready to take the green flag for the final time tonight here in the TRC BM246W preseason testing here at Barcelona. And you can see a lot of weaving as Bird makes contact with the wall, and that is going to be early contact for Bird. Early damage for Bird, I should say. And now we'll have to try and get that car turned back around. It shouldn't cause too much of an issue with the handling and performance of that car, but it's not going to be in tip-top shape like it was before. And now coming out of the final corner as we get ready to take the green flag for the final time tonight. Green, 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 racing once more in a gloomy Barcelona as we have the headlights all out, illuminating the track ahead. Wagner is in the lead. Bird and Kelta fighting for P2. Bird will take the inside, as there's a little bit of argy-bargy contact with Romero behind. But ultimately, they do sort themselves out. Now Kelta looking for an early move on Bird, and Kelta will have the inside through turn 3, which does give the inside to turn 4 as they make a little bit of a bump of contact there. Bird now looking for the cutback. Bird will hold, or Kelta will hold on to the outside and will now have the inside for turn 5. Heiderstadt in a perfect position to pick up the pieces, looking for a late lunge into 5, as now the GT4s are rolling. Just 3 GT4s of Craters, Elizondo, and Miller. It's going to be a battle between Craters and Elizondo here. Then Douglas, Mikey, Horner, and Merkel. Merkel rolling out of the pit lanes late. But it is Douglas, Mikey, and then Horner just about as they finished previously. But up ahead, the M2s have strung themselves out now, just falling in line, racing in their order. Bird now under attack from Heiderstadt, and it was a touch, but Bird ended up just holding on to it. A little bit of a big moment there. Heiderstadt now gets a little loose, and Harris tries to peek through the middle, does thread the needle, and Harris up into P3, but does go a little bit too deep into the chicane. Romero also goes deep. Does Bird get the cutback here? Heiderstadt with a little bit of a touch on Bird. Atwell gets spun around and behind. Absolute chaos. Now the GT4s trying to close up the gap. Heiderstadt now falling way, or was falling way behind. I think that was Atwell. Atwell still in the sand at the outside of the chicane. Wagner with Kelta up ahead. Bird and Heiderstadt, or actually Harris up ahead. Now Bird had to abandon turn 1. That does allow Heiderstadt up ahead, and Heiderstadt looking to move forward onto Harris. Kelta trying to close up the gap on Wagner ahead. Craters gets a drive-through penalty, I believe, for speeding in pit lane, and that all but gives the GT4 win to Elizondo, but Craters will fight it as long as possible before serving that drive-through penalty. Horner and Mikey, but Mikey actually very early under attack from Douglas. Douglas allows Mikey to go through, and it is the perfect old-school switcheroo as Douglas goes up the inside, has to dive to the inside to go to the inside of Miller. Miller does eventually open up the gap to allow those drivers to make their way through, but Douglas with the textbook switcheroo at turn number 4. Big sparks from the bottoms of these BMW M6 GT3s. Kelta P2 and M2s, Harris P3 and M2s, Bird P4, and Heiderstadt now P5. Gonzalez has closed up the gap though, as Gonzalez looks to go toe-to-toe with Heiderstadt here shortly. Romero also onto the back of this group. Bird has to abandon the chicane. Drain also at the back of this lead pack in M2's. Rowan has been slightly dropped off, and Rowan gets turned around as big contact between, as we've got M3 or GT3s getting sandwiched by GT4s. Horner was in the lead of GT3, but with a triple whammy of GT2 or GT3s, M2s and GT4s, too many numbers, too many letters, all in one spot. But just a cluster of traffic at the exit of the chicane. It's like semi-trucks, Mini Coopers, and motorcycles all trying to come to a stop at a stoplight, and everybody's going 100 miles an hour. It just does not end well. And now we've got GT3s trying to slice through both M2s and GT4s, as Mikey almost makes contact with the M2 of Gonzalez. Elizondo trying to go through. Mikey gets door checked by Heiderstadt. And let's go on with Horner to just watch this chaos from behind. Horner and Mikey in battle here, as they are going to be closing up, as Horner goes very deep and aggressive on Mikey. We've got an incident behind with the M2 of Gonzalez and the M2 of Heiderstadt, and they have big damage on those M2s. Back on board with Horner, trying to get this move done on Mikey, but also negotiate the traffic. They did make it past the number 15 GT4 of Elizondo, but they've got quite a few M2s to make it through ahead. Wagner and Kelta fighting for the M2 lead up ahead. We just barely see them off in the background. Now being choked up by Romero as Horner makes contact with Mikey. And now Horner will try to just pull through this M2 field. A big difference in speed between the GT3s, and Horner will slow down and allow Mikey to close that gap up. Kelta and Wagner. Kelta did make it past Wagner at turn 1 through turn 2. Wagner does have the opportunity for the cutback. And as they come out of 3 and into 4, does Wagner go to set up the switcheroo into 4? Just goes very, very deep, almost makes contact. It's got to be late braking off of the optimum braking point. And that is not going to help Wagner very much in trying to close this gap to Kelta. Very unique braking and throttle zones here, as car number me gets a penalty for not having lights turned on, even though I'm not going anywhere, but that's okay. It is battle here for the M2 lead between Kelta and Wagner. Wagner was in the lead earlier on, but Kelta has taken this lead back, and it seems that Kelta may be driving away with it. Mikey did get spun by Horner earlier on, as we've got a big choke up here as Kelta and Wagner. Horner going through has definitely thrown a wrench into this fight. Now it is 3 ways. Wagner is in a teammate sandwich. Kelta ahead, Harris behind, and now Wagner has the teammates to fend off both of them at once. And the teammates have definitely, or the teammates should definitely work together here nicely. Maybe the M2 of Harris pushes some pressure onto Wagner and forces him to go defensive, allowing Kelta to drive away. Just a little bit of team orders, things that you may see. Elizondo going past the M2 of Drain, or looking to go past the M2 of Drain. That gap was very, very tight when they came across the line. Wagner still trying to close up onto the back of that M2 of Kelta, as Douglas and Horner in the GT3s have pulled away. Elizondo and Miller still trying to cut their way through the GT4 field, as Wagner is closing the gap slightly, at least in some parts of the track. You are seeing a little bit of a difference in maybe the drivers with this track. Some have good sections of the track, some have poorer sections of the track. Kelta gets a big moment coming out of 8, and now Wagner looks to have an answer for Kelta here. 2 tires off in the sand is going to affect the drive out of turn 9 a little bit, but hard braking into turn 10. Is it enough for Wagner to get the move done side by side as they come into turn number 12? And still side by side, Kelta having to avoid some contact there, and Kelta hard braking into turn 13 as they come into 14 and 15, still side by side through the chicane. Only so much room for the cars there. Wagner does resume the lead here in M2s with the teammates of Kelta and Harris. Now P2 and P3 behind. Car number 47 of Miller around to the chicane and just trying to find a space in the cars to get that GT4 turned around. Gonzalez and Grant in a battle here for position yet again, just as we saw in the race prior. All of the GT3s have cycled through. The GT4s trying to cycle through, and Craters coming in to serve that drive-through penalty. Wagner and Kelta coming through turn 4. Kelta had a big moment sliding the rears, pushing, maybe pushing a little bit too hard, but still plenty of room for mistakes. These M2s are a different beast to handle. Some drivers master them, some it takes a little bit to get used to them, and this could be the getting used to right here. But Wagner and Kelta 100% in a very tight battle for position. So we'll go on board with Wagner looking backwards at that M2 of Kelta, as they come into turn 10. Kelta is around, likely running that car with no traction control. It didn't look like any contact between, but just too early on the throttle and too much throttle at that sends that M2 around. Now Harris is left with all of the work to do to try and close this gap and take this one away from Wagner, but Wagner has definitely got the speed in these M2s. Harris will try and do their best to close that gap up, but it just depends on how much speed Harris has in that M2. About 7.5 minutes left in this race. Douglas holding on to a nice lead in GT3, as Horner is pretty secured in P2. Mikey pretty secured in P3. There has been chaos galore in this race. Elizondo still trying to make it through some of the M2 field, as those M4s, you could call a GT3 a glorified street car, you could call a GT4 a glorified street car, you could call an M2 a glorified street car. The M2 is about as close as it gets, but these M4s, they do not run a ton of horsepower, not as much as you see the GT3s running, and it seems to be that maybe these GT4s have a little bit of trouble making it past these M2s in these tight sections. The TC cars, the M2s, are not necessarily slow in a straight line. They can keep up with the GT4s. It just depends on the track, on where those GT4s will make up the time. The GT4s ultimately are faster over the lap. but it is not a huge difference as Elizondo is pushing the M2 of Romero up onto the battling cars ahead, pushing Romero into the fight for what is going to be P3, I believe. Bird and Kelta in battle here. It was Kelta and Wagner, now Bird and Kelta, and Elizondo is pushing Romero into this fight. I think that's why Elizondo has just not gone past. Elizondo is giving Romero a big old bump down the start-finish, the pit straight. And here is that bump draft. Not sure if they're teammates, but they may be, but this is definitely some bonding right here. As Elizondo pushing Romero all the way down the straight. How close does Romero get? Romero is a lot closer than they were, but got to be on the brakes for a really long time to get that car slowed down. As the cars ahead battle, it is going to allow Romero to get back into that battle. Wagner with 1.3 seconds to Harris behind Kelta, with Bird absolutely on his tail. And I think Romero has bowed out of that fight behind. But Bird looking for a late move. Is there contact? There is very, very near contact. Kelta, I think, had to back out of it in a little bit of a panic, and Bird goes ahead into turn number 7 and 8. Now Bird with a little bit of a moment coming out of 8. Does Kelta force the envelope for the move into 9? He does. They are side by side. You can just see that M2 as Elizondo gives Kelta a monster bump. And that, I believe, is going to be enough almost to allow Kelta to go past Bird. Bird goes very, very deep into 10 though. Will rejoin, but will rejoin behind Kelta, and I think Elizondo is going to help whoever is further behind in this battle. 1/10 of a second, or not 1/10, 1,000th of a second between Kelta and Bird at the last timing line. As Kelta now almost went on 2 wheels coming out of the chicane there, and now Elizondo gives Kelta the bump. I think he deserves, or thinks that everybody deserves the bump a little bit. And Bird maybe not so much happy that he doesn't get the bump, as Elizondo pushes Kelta further ahead. Car number 185 of Gonzalez off at 10, and that is actually off at 11, and that is a big bit of damage on that M2. Bird trying to close up to the M2's, or to the M2 of Kelta ahead, as Elizondo is giving Kelta that push. And I don't think that Bird is too happy about that. Thinks it's maybe a little bit unfair, pushing a car away from you. Bird is just flashing those lights, maybe flashing because he's on the stream, who knows. Think that is going to be some flashing because he's on the stream, or just very, very, very disappointed. Either way, the chaos is definitely there. Elizondo still pushing Kelta, as these M2s will have to be on the brakes for a very, very, very long time as Kelta goes too deep. Bird follows through, and I think there's just a complete disregard for track limits, as now Elizondo leaves Bird and Kelta to it, and this is the fight for P3 in M2. And this is actually going to be coming on to the final lap here shortly. Douglas, as Bird abandons the chicane, pulls side by side beside Kelta, as Kelta pushing way too hard. Coming out of the final corner, almost loses it, but that does open the door for Bird into turn number 1. Elizondo now once again backing out of this fight, as this is going to be Not this lap, but the next lap will be the final lap as Douglas comes across and Bird loses it at turn number 1. After all of that, Bird loses that position, falls back to P6 in M2s, and Kelta will all but have that position secured, P3 in M2. Elizondo just having fun, the GT4 leader. Again, this is not a multi-class series, but it is multi-class testing. It is going to be a multi-class series as the series progresses, but everyone will be in the same car for that race weekend. It will either be the M2 TCX, the M4 GT4, or the M6 GT3. Do not get to pick your car. They are set per track, so we should see some pretty wacky track and car configurations as the season goes on. But as we continue forward, the clock will round to 0. And here shortly, Douglas will take the checkered flag for race number 3. As the night has seemed to have calmed down as we got further on, Bird saying, well, I guess Bird just deciding to go for it, saying that he had a track warning to spare, but obviously does not as he gets a drive-through penalty. Douglas takes the checkered flag in race number 3. Horner, coming out of the final corner, will take P2 in race 3, and Mikey will eventually take P3. Wagner holding on to the lead in M2s. Same with Elizondo. As the chaos that we have seen tonight seems like it will only carry over into the season as we get started next week. Will be very interesting to see how this series progresses, as this is a bit of a different style series. It is a spec car for each round. Tracks will change, and the car will change, albeit, or be it the M2, the M4, or the M6, hence the 246. But we will just have to wait and see. Next week, we will be getting started round 1 at Kyalami. Quite the track to get this season debuted with. But Wagner will take home the checkered flag in race 3 for the M2s. And actually it is Harris who will take home P2 in M2, and Kelta will eventually take home P3. Elizondo wins in GT4, and the majority of everyone seems to have left the session, so I don't think that I am really going to spend too much time on the results. As Horner is giving us our first burnouts, or donuts of the season. Just absolutely burning down the house there. Thank you all for tuning in. We will see you all next week for round 1 of this 246W series. But before then, we will be back on Sunday for the special event TRC 6 Hours of the Nordschleife. It is a multi-class, multi-driver 6-hour endurance event that we will be holding on Sunday. I believe it is Sunday 11 Eastern. If you have not signed up for that event, make sure that you sign up for that event if you would like to follow along the action and make sure that you are here on Sunday at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. And I will also see you all on Monday for the Go Fast Racing Round 4. I want to say it's Round 4. Yes, Round 1 was Barcelona. Round 2, Red Bull Ring. Round 3, Monza. We will be back next week for Round 4 of the Go Fast Racing GT3 Series. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you to TRC for hosting these races tonight and also giving me the opportunity to do commentary for them. We will see you all on Sunday for the TRC 6-hour. Hope to get some more entries for that event before we get started with that event. And thank you all for racing. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will catch you next time.